What is the place of horror as a genre in horrible times? Because you're thinking about this dystopic reality. You're thinking about a president and a movement where cruelty is the point. We got kids and people in concentration camps in this country.
It's always hard to say what age you're in because you can't really tell until you have perspective. But for a lot of folk, I'm sort of inclined to agree this is the third golden age of horror. The first in the 30s when it kind of first got started, and then that period in the late 60s when there was George Romero and John Carpenter and all that kind of crazy stuff. And then now, and all three are periods marked by incredible turmoil and conflict. The Great Depression, and then Vietnam and Watergate, Civil Rights era, and the Women's Rights era. And now we're right back to a period, and I think part of it is for a lot of Americans, it feels like the world is turned upside down. Everything we expected in 2015 has reversed after 2016.
And again, with the benefit of hindsight, we'll have some clarity on this. These horror movies were a deprivation of one or more of the senses, sight or hearing, or you can't talk. What does that tell us, too? Because I'm going back and forth about that, about the collective subconscious.
At some level of the root, it is an unwillingness to believe or engage in the world around us. Like somehow this can't be happening. And to me, that's the root of a lot of this horror. This can't be happening. And that's what people felt like in 1931 with the Great Depression. This is crazy. We spent our entire life. We worked. We were told if we work hard and save money, we'll be okay. And now the banks have failed and the government says there's nothing we can do about it. And it's like, what is this? And then, of course, the period of the 60s, King gets assassinated. Bobby Kennedy's been assassinated. John F. Kennedy's been assassinated. You've got violent riots in the streets and Americans saying, wait, this is America. It's not supposed to be that way. And so now here we are again looking at the world around us and saying, this can't be right. This can't be the reality that I'm seeing. Whether it's Bird Box and A Quiet Place, or even a film like Us or Get Out, they're the same sort of films where you go like, hey, wait a minute, this reality that I think I see isn't real. And I can't quite get my head around what is really, really happening.
How did Us make you feel? What was your emotional reaction the first time seeing it?
So I've seen it twice. And so the first time, I must admit, the entire film was unsettling from its very beginning. And I actually think that beginning at the fair and the kind of parents, and you tell something's a little off and the father's maybe a little bit drunk, that feeling of uncomfortableness, something's awkward. Like if you go to someone's house for a dinner party and the couple starts fighting and you feel this awkward, I just want to get out of here. Like this just doesn't feel right. I felt like that permeated the entire film, even when had her family introduced later and Winston Duke, who's just funny and charming. For me, it always felt like there was something was always off throughout the entire film. And that, to me, that's amazing to keep that tone of discomfort, unsettled, all the way through a film and yet never make me want to take my eyes away from it.
And Peele is just so masterful in terms of thinking about the grammar of horror, because you can go down the list. Great horror movie in the genre that he's working with. If you're paying close attention, it's all there on the screen. All the winks are at you. And it's just up to you to connect the dots. So before we get into some of those specifics, he's so intentional in his filmmaking and so confident and competent in his filmmaking. Damn, I'm just jealous to be like, damn, your second film, you're doing this. I want to see the third or fourth one, man. You're better. You're winning. But another part of me, and I'm sort of uncomfortable with it, is like, okay, how does it impact a film when a writer or director is that self-conscious of his own mythos, his own filmic universe? Because he's clearly creating a universe. I'm going to give you all the winks. I'm going to give you all the breadcrumbs to follow. And I was like, that's wonderful. But then, as I said, I have this anxiety. Can your magic trick be too sophisticated?
I absolutely agree it can be, because it can come a point where it's art. And once it's art, it kind of stops being engaging. And I think the other thing, and this is one of the responses to some of my students who went to see Us, is they said, not really scared. And I kind of agree. Like, say, I was not scared by Us at this point in my career. I'm not scared by much, but as much as I was unsettled by it. And I think in some ways, quite intentionally, Peele never wants to really scare us. And you think about, again, I keep going back to Winston Duke's character, Gabriel, or Gabe. I think you think about if you watch his performance throughout the entire film, he never quite leaves being a kind of comic character. Even when he's in distress, even when he's on the boat, even when his leg has been hurt, there's not terror. There's always a distance he's always a little bit funny. And there's a great moment at the end where he and the daughter are looking at something from behind an ambulance. He makes some dad joke and the daughter rolls her eyes like, just, oh God, there goes dad again. And at one level that keeps it from being scary. At the other level, it keeps the audience focused on what you're talking about. We're not so wrapped up in it being scary as we are unsettled by how real this seems and how there seems to be lots of meaning there, and we're trying to find that meaning.
This is a movie that is unapologetically black in terms of the characters, in terms of the way that black bodies are presented. And in terms of thinking about sustained terror and anxiety and racial battle fatigue, well, there's a hell of a lot of terror right there. Black family that's upper class on a road trip, and there's so many little winks. So, for example, they're talking about calling the cops. He's like, don't call the cops. He's like, yeah, they're the only black family in the neighborhood. We're not going to call the cop. Or sort of these anxieties about class. And race is never spoken about in the movie except by his white friend. And even then, it's not explicit. It's the name on the boat. It's NWA. It's the O.J. Simpson joke. It's they're on the beach, and the two twins, which is another wink to Kubrick, are talking to their daughter. And they're like, oh, why don't you get in the water? Well, she's a black woman who just had her hair done. So there's all sorts of anxiety there about being black, being upper class, your safety and security.
When the family's driving and getting to the beach and getting to this almost entirely white area, that's part of what I think is the genius of the unsettling nature of the film. That's there lingering in the side, but as you say, it's not invoked directly. It's always just part of that tension that kind of resides around the entire film. I think that's masterful, because if you made it that, like if you brought that in, then that would let audiences go, okay, yeah, so that's what this is about. Just like if you made the film really, really scary, where it's more like a home invasion film, although that's part of it, then we'd say, okay, well, that's what this film is about. But he never lets us settle. Like, we're always a little off base.
Part of horror, especially this type of home invasion genre, or horror in general, especially demonic possession films, is the assault on the family. The assault on domesticity, safety and security in the home, the disruption of the nuclear family and relationships. What are some of the other horror tropes this Peele winking at?
Often in home invasion films, it's often like a second home. It's a family home or a vacation home, or it's like a summer home. So that plays out. Of course, the doppelganger is a huge trope all the way back into sort of Gothic literature, but then played up again in science fiction, where you have like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So that plays out. And I actually think one of the tropes of horror that plays out in lots of interesting ways is the idea of mirroring or doubling. Now, obviously, that's partly the doppelganger, but it's also the mirroring, as you were talking about earlier, of the white family, the friends, and our protagonist family, the Wilson family, in that they are kind of mirror opposites of each other. They've got the twins, they've got the two kids, that very uncomfortable conversation with Adelaide, played by Lupita, and her friend, all that. But again, that kind of mirroring doubling. There's the doubling of the current Wilson family and Adelaide's earlier family. And so you get those kind of mirror upon mirror upon mirror, kind of shadow opposite people, both the doppelganger people, but these others is all being reflections of each other.
That in a lesser film, you would have had the great reveal at the end about who put the people in the tunnels, about what happens next. I'm going to connect all the dots, and I'm going to give you your lazy exposition. And notice, there's no real exposition in this film. There's no, I'm going to talk to the stupid people in the audience moment.
We are left unsettled all the way through the end, past the end, to after the credits roll. He never is going to give us closure. The Marines don't arrive and shut down the evil experiment or anything. Like, we are absolutely, and I actually quite loved it. I kind of paid a lot of attention to this the second time. When there is a kind of explanation for what has been going on, it is very clearly framed as, this is what the character thinks might have happened. But we actually never know the basis of this, where it came from, because the minute it explained itself to us, it would become one-dimensional. And I think he doesn't want that to happen.
Great films reward careful viewing. From the opening shot with the videos next to the television, you have Chud, one of my favorites, also one of my favorite insults for Trump supporters. That's a movie about cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers in the sewers. The Man with Two Heads, there's the doppelganger. You have The Right Stuff, of course, sort of establishing that time period. And then you have that other video that says Tuesday Nights. I was like, okay, is that a video of something they record on Tuesday? Is that something, a porno they play on Tuesday? Is it something they made from the USA Network? Boy, rather young child. The Jaws shirt on. The sister wearing the shirt that says rabbit in French. The allusions to driving and running and dancing. The boat. Everything connects if you're paying attention.
Almost all of it connects back through film history. So the boat and the Jaws and the do the right stuff going up, and instead it's about going down. I think you mentioning The Shining is exactly true, is a good sort of parallel, because what makes The Shining so fascinating is it is so densely packed and so intentionally densely packed that as viewers we can't help but keep trying to pick apart the puzzle. And I think Peele in his own way, maybe not quite as esoteric as Kubrick, but Peele in his own way has jammed this film so that almost every scene has this really dense visual motif. To me, the interesting bookends are the early scene with the Hall of Mirrors into the Native American forest, and it's all Indian themed. And then when it comes back, and at the end of the film, it now is Merlin and this European mythological framing. And I think even the shift from one frame to the other is really meaningful as the film is kind of playing with, I think at some macro level, the history of America. That sounds grandiose, but I think that's wrapped up in this film.
Down below, you're still going to have the mirroring, and we just change our country superficially. And that's why I love that line from Adelaide where she says, "We are Americans."
And in some ways, this is the history of America. It is the erasure of one people and the writing on top of another people. And in some ways, that is kind of the visual motif of the film, is layering upon layering upon layering, but underneath doesn't go away. And that biggest aspect of horror genre is that idea of past trauma, buried, hidden, and forgotten, but never leaving, always kind of resurfacing.
Well, horror is a moral document. Everybody is indicted, which is perhaps why this movie was so unsettling to me. Again, lesser filmmaker would be like, I'm not going to have black and brown folks be indicted in this system of inequality. Not in this film. Everybody's hands are dirty. But I'm struggling with the catharsis. Or is that part of why it's so unsettling that there isn't one?
I honestly don't think there is one. It fits in with those great horror films of the 70s, which were so dark and so open, and the plot is resolved, but there's no sense of we get out. There is no resolution. And in fact, what we learn at the end of the film unsettles everything about who is the protagonist and the antagonist and who's right and who's wrong. To your point about nobody gets off scot-free, to me, one of the overarching sort of political messages in the film, fairly obvious, I guess, is it's a film about privilege. And all of us live on unearned privilege that is at the expense of other people. And it's easy to forget that, given the stratifications of society, to think, well, if I'm below some other group of people, I am the oppressed. But oppression is a system of privilege and cost that cycles its way all around the globe. And all of us at some level are living on the unearned privilege that we took intentionally or unintentionally from other people. And I think this film really leaves you with that uncomfortable realization.
So that's the other genius of the film, because now we know the ending about the doppelgangers and the reversal. They're switching places, which again, if you're paying attention, it was always there. When she's in the car, when Adelaide's in the car playing the Luna song, I've Got Five on it, she's clapping on the wrong beat. There's always something a wee bit off. Behind the eyes, the motion pictures, the images, her son draws the picture of the man with 1111. Then when she's a child coming back and using drawing as therapy, but there's always something a wee bit off with the character. And then you have the big reveal. So you see it the second time and it's a totally different movie. And who are we supposed to root for at this point?
There really is no innocent character or figure in the film. Even to that very opening move of the film, when you see the parents with the therapist and talking about, well, she doesn't talk and find a way of expression, and that she's a ballet dancer, everything lines back up, and you realize this horrible realization that this protagonist, this caring mother, this loving wife, has been acting those roles, that that's not really her or whatever the real her is, and that this horrible evil red character is actually our protagonist. She's the victim. She's the one who suffered. And I think that reversal, again, it's one of those great moments where the entire film is unsettled. And so whatever we thought could have been closure or could have been moral clarity, we walk out of the film saying, wow, there's no easy answer here. There's no clear bad guy. There's no clear good guy. We are left in a completely ambiguous moral universe.
As a scholar of film, what were some of the films you were ticking off in your head saying, okay, he knows his stuff and here's where this is coming from?
The first ones that were popping up to me were the science fiction films of the 50s. Even if having it in Santa Cruz, California, where a lot of those horror films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers were set out there, and the pseudo-scientific aspect of the second part of it. So as much as it was horror, I did think that was another big element to it. And then, of course, there's some maybe lesser-known films, but like Tobe Hooper's Funhouse, which is a film set in a carnival with a lot of the same images, including the House of Mirrors as being a sort of horrible place. And then, of course, the home invasion films, whether it's The Strangers more recently or earlier films like Funny Games, felt like almost every shot was a reference to, but not an imitation of. And I do think to me, that's important, because there's certainly films I watch or media I watch that are derivative.
When you're improvising, you're not just playing whatever you want. You're playing around a melody. So Peele, in sort of that improvisational sensibility, He's saying, you know what? I'm going to draw on all these things. I'm going to mix it up and make it something myself. I'm going to show you where I got it from if you're paying attention, but I'm going to put my own spin on it. So that's the difference between something that's derivative or somebody saying, I'm going to show you the genre. I'm going to show you where I did my homework. And now I'm going to show you what my voice is.
I think thinking of Peele as like a great jazz improvisational player, like a Miles Davis or a blues player, I think that may be the best metaphor for his filmmaking. He takes familiar tunes and he starts with that tune and then goes in directions you could not have ever imagined, nor that are they derivative, but they are their own artistic genius, but never leaving the tune, right? Never leaving the band uncertain, right? So they're always playing back. That's a perfect metaphor.
Because again, he could have chosen so many other examples to take that Reagan Hands Across America, our shining city on the hill, good morning, a new day in America, and to make that and flip that. Because again, Reaganism, for a lot of folks who lived through it, especially now in hindsight, was a nightmare. If you're black, you're brown, you're poor, you're gay, lesbian, never mind wars abroad, Central Latin America, death squads.
The shining city on the hill does not see the dark shadows in the valley underneath. And so, again, this is my era, so I remember We Are the World and Hands Across America and all these kind of spectacular displays of American philanthropy at the same time that Reagan was fueling wars in the Middle East and Latin America, that we weren't funding AIDS research. Again, a kind of dichotomy. There's this shiny, happy face of America that's all about protecting people and doing the right thing in the world. And then there's this reality dark shadow self, which is creating an awful lot of chaos and suffering and damage. And yet people are just kind of not attending to that.
You know, you see a great film that you love, you always notice something new. You don't know if it's just because you've chosen to forget things from before. So during the first viewing, I'm like, okay, I know the man can do it. He's checking off the boxes. It was so good and competent. I'm waiting for something to happen. He's going to totally mess up. In the movie, because there is some humor there, the characters do some stupid things. When she goes into the woods, but that in his hands, that's just a link, in my opinion, to the genre.
And even to the point when the daughter, she says, go run, and the daughter's running, and then, she finally decides to stop, and there is her doppelganger right there. That's right out of Friday the 13th, where everybody goes running, and then as soon as they stop, there is the killer waiting to get them. Those nods are very intentional, but as you say, they don't take you out of the film.
But I'll tell you, the moment where the film became more than the sum of its parts was the conclusion with the ballet dancing and their duel to the Luna song. That's where the movie transcended itself.
It was a beautiful, bizarre scene that also underscored the distinction, I guess, between Red, who was actually the human, and Adelaide, who was the doppelganger. That the human child, even though raised among the tethered, was still the one who had this kind of beautiful creativity ability. It was like a shadow dance, a person dancing with their own shadow. For me, the moment that the film really felt the most real, I think it was actually the beach scene when the young boy disappeared and the terror on the mother's, Adelaide's, face and the panic. That was the first time I started to feel the stakes of the film. To me, it was the echo of her own childhood trauma, or what we now know as someone else's childhood trauma. But that echo of being separated from your family in this place. And we as the audience already kind of know about the Hall of Mirrors and all the possibility there. And so that to me was the moment sort of stepped up to another level, I guess.
She knows what's happening. She may not be able to articulate it, but she knows. And when they show up, and that's where the scene between her and Red, or Adelaide, depending on how you want to term it, where she's confronting her. She's like, we know what your secret is. You know what you did.
What I find interesting, and this is what's so powerful about Peele's film, is that crime, you know what you did, echoes from Adelaide individually. And probably all of us have things we could look back and say, in retrospect, I wish I hadn't done that, for my own self-interest, out to familial levels where we all know that, out to social levels, but then to the historical levels. Like I right now am speaking to you from Syracuse, New York, which is on the ancestral lands of the Onondaga Nation and the Haudenosaunee, and I have no right to be here other than the reality of history, and yet here I am in this place, just as we know, you can kind of keep playing that broader geopolitical privilege. We all know we are living on a crime, and Adelaide is just facing that crime where most of the rest of us get away free.
That when you think about what comes next, how these worlds are now merged, this inversion, that Adelaide has the skill to teach her family how to survive in this new world. And then what does that say about, again, not corruption per se, but survival, about a reckoning, justice? Now you're going to have to learn the rules of my world, and I'm going to let you understand how to survive.
which I find interesting as one of the broader themes across a lot of contemporary pop culture. And I guess I go back to Walking Dead as an example of that, and Fear the Walking Dead as incredibly popular narratives that are entirely about you have to learn to live in this new world. And it is a more brutal world, and it is dog eat dog and kill or be killed. Think about the 2016 election, which at least at some level seemed to be about a lot of white people in the middle part of the country suddenly feeling the precarity of their way of life. Other people, whether that was immigrants or people of color or whoever, that people were coming to take away what they perceived as their rightful way of life, that was slipping away. And then that gets framed as geopolitics and racism, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all about that precarity and really privilege. And so in some ways, what I liked about Us is it takes that broader theme but kind of reformulates it with a different kind of geopolitical sensibility and a different kind of racial sensibility. But ultimately, it's still about survival, and it's still about your family surviving.
What is Peele's commentary? What is Us saying about our society?
I think it challenges us all to look underneath what we're sitting on. We're all living in Santa Cruz, in the beach, in these beautiful homes, with our lake, with our boat that kind of works. Very few of us, I'll say, very few of us have the moral courage to look at those, whether living or past people, to whom we're tethered, to whom our privilege is tethered, to whom our lifestyle is tethered, because we don't want to acknowledge that. We don't want to think about the people, the children who are mining the minerals other children in other parts of the world are putting into our cell phones. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to look underneath. I don't want to pop that hood. I'd rather just stay at the surface and say, hey, I've got a boat, I've got a house, I've got a family, I've got kids. And I think Peele, the indictment to us is have the courage to look down at the beneath, at what's below us.
I want to thank Kendall Phillips one more time for that great teaching and sharing. Now, as I said earlier, is this tethered Chauncey DeVega or above ground Chauncey DeVega? Because this next segment, Brother Adelifu Nama and I go to the barber shop. Two brothers at the barber shop chopping it up. Or as Brother Nama likes to say, in the woodshed, because he's a craftsman in the woodshed. Now, Brother Nama, we're a wee bit more critical in this conversation about Jordan Peele's Us. Is this an example where Brother Peele's reach and grasp are not the same thing? Are its politics so utterly transparent on the nose that it complicates, and not in a good way, it obscures the art and the entertainment value of the film? Is it really a horror movie? What is Jordan Peele signaling to? And in those efforts to make these comments about race and class, how is he not as precise as he intends to be? And as always, for careful listeners, listen all the way through to the end of this week's episode. You may hear, as they say in the spirit of the Marvel movies, an Easter egg. Without further ado, Brother Professor, friend of the podcast, Adelifu Nama, here on The Chauncey DeVega Show.
When I was 14, I stayed out one night. Oh, mama.
Yeah, let's do the barbershop mode. And I'll tell you a story, because at the barbershop, we like to share stories. That's what griots do. We tell stories. Now, I saw it Friday. I didn't see it Thursday. I broke my rule. I don't like to see movies open at night because people talk. And I knew there'd be a lot of us in there talking at the damn movie. But I said, it's a horror movie. I want to see it with people to see their reaction. So I'm sitting there with my notebook. I'm annoying people writing during the movie, writing little things down that I notice. And there's a white couple behind me, older white couple, look like they have money, because you can tell when people have money. Throughout the whole movie, especially the second half, the husband and the wife, because they were married, he's complaining about the movie. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. What's the big deal? This is horrible. And she's just agreeing and agreeing and agreeing. And at the end of the movie, I almost turned around and said, you're mad because you're not in the damn movie. The whiteness is not centered in the movie, and you don't know how to take it, because what Peele is saying about the white folks in the film is just cut you too hard, the way he was satirizing them and exposing their truth. Do you think that was fair or unfair if I had said that?
Well, I think on several points. I think this film, Jordan Peele's sophomore effort, is replete with opportunities to judge the film across the spectrum. So I think in some ways, the critic or the everyday person, critic that sat behind you, they're correct. You could argue, oh, this is not good. But in other ways, I think the film does have flashes of brilliance. So, and any good art, in my mind, should, as a cornerstone of any claim of being of any type of relevant value, it should provoke. It should provoke conversation and heated advocacy. So in that sense, I think the film fulfills that. Now, we can get into the other dynamics in terms of how much is it satire, how much is it A for effort, and how much is it really about us not being able to see the borders or threshold of where this film is taking us in terms of a film history, a film knowledge, and also as social commentary. You know, one of the things that I'm trying to be mindful about is to not critique, oh, he should have did this, and I'm critiquing the film that he didn't. But on the other hand, I want to be careful not to praise him for the film he meant to make. And that is the place that at least I'm trying to navigate here, is to strike a critical balance and at the same time not be too deferential, and at the same time not feel that I need to totally deconstruct the film in terms of to a state of nothingness where it has no value. So we have our work cut out, because I think the film, it gives us that type of range, all or nothing.
And I don't know how many times you saw it. So the first time, maybe it's just me being contrarian, going with a critical lens, I'm looking to be disappointed. And at a certain point, just like we talked about last time about Black Panther, that moment when you know they got you. So for me, the movie became more than the sum of its parts. In the ending, with the dancing and the Lunas song, that's when for me the movie became, I was like, okay, he's transcended something.
First of all, I came in expecting, you can't expect this film to be similar to Get Out. I think that's an unfair expectation. It reminds me of Nas when he dropped Illmatic, and then he's going to do subsequent to Illmatic. Becomes the benchmark and standard by which we gauge. And so I think Get Out is a classic, and I'm waiting to see what type of material Jordan Peele creates that might be similar classic. And I'm not sure Us is that. That's where I am right now. I'm more interested actually in Jordan Peele's third film, because then I think in my mind, I'll see whether he truly embraces the mantle of being an auteur. And I'm not sure if our audience has placed him on the auteur pedestal, but I'm not sure if that's where he wants to operate from.
Because you said auteur, because I was reading one of the reviews, and in the same sentence, like the framing was, is he Romero? Is he Carpenter? Going down the list, Spielberg's like, no, it's a second movie. We don't know. And he's certainly, Romero's my favorite filmmaker. And George Lucas is, for Star Wars, is next level for me. That's a totally different type of film. This movie is extremely synthetic. It's highly literate. Its grammar is spot on. You know what to look for in terms of the horror conventions and what he's including. It's all there. He leaves all the breadcrumbs. But here's the but. I didn't articulate it well when I talked to Kendall yesterday. I like the fact that he's made his own universe, but I wonder if he's too clever for his own good.
Right. My concern is that I'm projecting a cleverness on to the work that may not necessarily bear itself out. In other words, on an emotional level, my response to the film was that the film did not flip my pancake, okay? So that didn't work for me. But from a intellectual standpoint, very thinking it through process, I'm like, the film gives me a lot to deal with. You talk about the visual breadcrumbs. I mean, we want to talk about that House of Mirrors, and there was an article regarding setup, so I'm not saying anything original here. I'm just a point previously made. It starts off, I believe, with the Native American kind of like motif, and then we come back years later, and I think they've tried to remask or paint over it from Merlin motif, and it speaks to kind of like a covering up of history, a way in which the Native American, and we're talking about the symbolism here, the Native American experience has been plastered over by self-serving history and made to fit into a narrative, but it still underscores this type of tragic baseline for our society and for American development. So that's in the film, right? But it's, like you said, for those who are looking for that, for those who come in with the notebook and the notepad and the little flashlight and the scribbling down notes while they look at it, that stands out. But possibly for that viewer who was sitting behind you, it just did not reach them on an emotional level. It didn't capture them in terms of a filmic process of first, second, third act. The narrative was riddled with a lot of holes and things that just didn't make sense. It was almost like the buckshot approach. For me, Get Out was the pinpoint accuracy of a sniper.
he was carpet bombing and he destroyed a lot of the targets, but he could have done it maybe with 1 or 2 smart bombs. So here's one, because in my notebook now, help me process this. The movie is not frightening in the traditional sense of horror. It's disturbing. It's psychological horror. Watching this as a Black person, working class brother, my own class position, I left that movie very unsettled and very uncomfortable for this reason, which is perhaps why it's effective in this regard. So you have the Black Cosbys with the Howard shirt who are also indicted in the exploitation of other people. And that's true. We're talking about class and race. We're all exploiting somebody. You be Black and working class with their Black poor folk. Peele's going after everybody. Are we all equally culpable?
When I come back to the issue, the tension that I think the film is mining, but I'm not sure it's not as masterful as certainly the first. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been recognized. That I feel like Get Out was the M. Night Shyamalan premiere, Sixth Sense. The type of film you go back and you look at all the clues and you see it was, they set it up right from the first scene. Go back and you see how finely crafted it is. And the certain way in which that type of craftsmanship, and here we get into the metaphysics film, that type of well-integrated craftsmanship operates at an emotional level. It's the same type of craftsmanship that let a film such as Birth of a Nation, which is racist propaganda, have a type of emotional heart and dread that not only the white moviegoer could identify with and feel, and certainly white supremacists was stirred the depths of their heart. But also, if you're a Black person, this film was a horror movie, right? Birth of a Nation. Because it struck not only the narrative, but the emotional erogenous zones, if you will, were stimulated by this film. And so there's a way in which I think Get Out certainly did that. But I think as a film, in terms of that experience, it wasn't able to provide that type of emotional gripping continuity. And I say that in the sense that, for me, an example of this, let's make it concrete, would be the narrative structure where the family shows up, the doppelganger family shows up, and everyone is like, this is a moment of high drama. When they're trying to get in the house, what do they want? Who are they? And usually that scenes are almost more toward the end, toward the deep in the second act, beginning of the third, where you actually confront your nemesis and you question them, they question you, and you find out who they are, what they want. And that didn't happen. That happened way in the beginning. So there's a way in which the tension of, filmically speaking, is let out. And they had to restart the tension. It's like a propeller, one of those old turboprop planes, where you got to start the propeller by manual. You have to spin it, kicks up, and then it dies down, and you got to spin it again. Or for me, maybe for others, an old lawnmower. And that happens when they catch and have the whole family shackle themselves together. They question back and forth, and then Lupita's character tells the girl, lets her go, and says, go after. Hey, no, we it's time to get in so that you can tell somebody to go run away and chase them, and the same thing happens with the boy. This, to me, is like one of those old Batman television shows. When you catch Batman, you got him. Okay, time to shoot the guy. You don't give a speech about Batman, and you certainly don't put a clock and some type of timer, some type of elaborate backtrack for him to, of course, get out of. And so that type of writing for me, that type of narrative setup, quite frankly, for me, that's amateur hour. Those type of mistakes are egregious. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure if the idea of what he's trying to accomplish and provoke in us over-permit almost the boxes you have to check when you just go about making a film. And so now, if he's an auteur, then of course you turn all the conventions on their head. What's at the beginning becomes the end, and the end becomes beginning. And certainly,
but he's not doing that. He has a very conventional narrative structure, so he's not an auteur in that regard, because he's not really upending any horror conventions. He's not an auteur,
right?
He's a very, very skilled storyteller who's very, at this point, synthetic. I made this observation when I was talking to Kendall, so you tell me you think I'm wrong. I get a sense that he's an improviser, almost like a jazz musician. He's taking all these other things, he's playing around a melody, and that's his sensibility. So the question then becomes, when is he just going to play some straight jazz? But I was thinking about the families, right? So I'm sure you thought about this. The moments where I was like, geez, I can't believe he got away with this. This is so smart. Because there are flashes of brilliance in the film. I guess I'm going to see it a third time and see where I end up in my final conclusion. Because he's also saying something about grotesque blackness.
Yes, indeed. Okay.
and we'll talk about the swerve at the end because then that begs questions about moral accountability. So you're sitting there. I thought he was going to go a little deeper about Fanon and the mask. Pluto literally wearing a white mask, that white mask of horror. And then you have Jason. He's wearing a gorilla mask, and the shirt he's wearing is a butler shirt. So if we're talking about grotesque depictions of stereotypes and blackness, we have so much going on there with these projections. And the man grunts, he groans, he's like a feral beast Negro, right? Winston Duke's doppelganger. So I'm like, all this stuff is going on. And at the end, because he's been very vocal saying this movie is about class, not race.
Right.
And that's where I was like, okay, you're going to go here. Well, race is hyper visible because you have a black family. And for black folks, just going to the beach is terror, worrying about the cops harassing you, right? So you always got a terror element there. And I love the moment where they're going to call the cops. And they're like, no, don't call the cops. Why? Because the only black family in the neighborhood. So blackness is all over the film. I don't feel like he resolves that question of grotesque blackness.
I think you tapped into my conundrum. You're quite, candid with me, because you're going in with Frantz Fanon, and so am I. Grotesque blackness. And for me, when I saw George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, I saw the scary zombie film that was scary. Oh, it's got a black lead, but I wasn't able to make sense of it and come to it until after I gotten over the fact that was a good scary movie. And then there was these other things that I was doing too. And that made it all the more, poignant. This one, it was just too much of coming in trying to decipher the puzzle. And the puzzle of it, to me, got in the way of the film. And now the question for me is that the filmmaker, or is that the projection of me coming in with my particular positionality? And to me, the master filmmaker is able to even quell my positionality in a film. That I'm not trying to figure out the puzzle. I'm trying to go along for the ride. And Get Out, I was able to do that. This film, and maybe it was all the pre-hype and everything that was involved, but I just found myself just really struggling, laboring to get through the film in terms of all this zigzagging.
So you got all the stuff with 11:11. I get that. Hell, for me, it was an obvious swerve. It wasn't even a swerve. I didn't need to see the Twilight Zone episode. That Lupita in the opening scene is clapping on the wrong beat.
Yes,
so
yes,
you're watching
yes,
it, you're like, okay, something's clearly off here. So then she goes into the fun house, and you know that the transfer took place there. So that's a given. And on one hand, it's like, I'm going to show you what the magic trick is. But it's like, Peele, you're being a little too clever for yourself here. And then even the opening shot, I love a smart movie where you can connect the dots later. If you look at the video, what does he have there? Chud, one of my favorite movies.
Yes, I saw this, yes.
The Man with Two Heads.
Yeah.
He has that Tuesday night video. I don't know what that was. I was like, is that a porno? Is that something he recorded on USA to Cinemax late at night? I don't know. The Right Stuff, which instead of going up to space, they go underground. The Jaws shirt. So you know something's going to happen there. Then all the allusions to running and driving. So he's given the breadcrumbs, and then it becomes the payoff. And at the end with the swerve, because now it's a totally different movie. Did it work for you? Because now I saw it a second, I was like, okay, who's the hero and who's the villain? Who's the protagonist? Who's the antagonist?
When you notice that scene about her being offbeat, right? I saw it and I wasn't sure, was that just bad direction or was that purpose? In other words, I've seen some other things that speak to miscues on direction. And so I'm not sure if that wasn't a miscue or not. Let me ask you, you've seen it enough times, maybe we can get into the weeds a bit, but the scene where the white family and black family first we see them encounter each other at the beach, and the conversation between Lupita's character and the white female character. At first, I thought they didn't know each other. This was their first meeting. And then other times it felt like, oh, they know each other. So now maybe that was just my reading of the first run through. Did you feel that dialogue and their relationship was friends, or is this a first encounter?
It felt like a first encounter, but in the scene prior where they're talking about meeting them, it felt like there'd be more warmth. But then I was like, okay, maybe they're frenemies and it's just like professional rivalry. I don't know.
Okay, good. So that's what I'm talking about. I don't know if that was intended or miscue or something happened in the editing of the film, because I thought that the film probably actually began with them in the car going to their summer house. The beginning actually felt tacked on. I didn't get it as a first act because I didn't understand. Usually in a film, here we go, the establishing shot is that of peace and tranquility, because it's going to end with chaos and disruption. And so the actual film begins with a girl who we are told she's scared. She doesn't want to go. anywhere. She's a person who seems like the ultimate wallflower as a young child with this candy apple. But yet she feels she can leave and feel that she can go to the most haunted, most scariest of places. There was a dissonance there for me. The story set it up that she was deathly afraid, can't leave her alone, but yet she wanders off by herself as if she's just an explorer. It's those type of things that I wasn't able to get into the film and feel like I know this family. And it had started with them in the car when I get a sense of their character traits, they're warm, the fault lines that operate. And then we move forward. It made a lot more sense to me. A part of me feels like the beginning was almost like one of these things where somebody screened the movie, didn't make sense. And they felt, okay, listen, we got to do something in the beginning here to shoot something to explain what we saw. That might not be the case, but that's how I felt. That means that the film is disjointed for me, but there's flashes of brilliance. Because in that scene, they're doing whack-a-mole, and that's the allusion to what? The mole people. So in that sense, I like it. I'm like, oh, man, for me, I think the film would have made a better science fiction horror film than this almost supernatural horror film, and it tries to be a hybrid.
And that's a really interesting point about what happens in the editing bay, because here's another version of the movie you could easily do. The movie starts with them on the road trip. The home is domesticity, is grandma's house. I love the unapologetic blackness of the film. And the movie can just start because domesticity is violated. And what you do is you save the rather obvious reveal about the funhouse to the end. So you have the foreshadowing, which basically gives it away. You save that to the end, and then it really hits you because now you're like, oh my God, this wonderful family under siege. Oh, but there's a twist. And then you have the flashback, and then it all comes together.
So this is what I'm saying. And I say this with all due humility and not hubris. I say this in that if I thought this, and I'm sure much better skilled in the filmmaking, because they actually do, they had to have thought of the same things that we're thinking of. Because if they didn't, Chauncey, then they need to put our names on their paycheck.
Fire said will help you.
You need us to come take over. It's just that simple.
You're right. It had to be a test screening issue that they reordered the movie. That had to be it. I'll give you another one in terms of characters that don't need to exist. You could have totally got rid of the white family. That had to be a decision too, because again, race is present in the film because it cannot be with black bodies on the screen. But the only characters that speak directly to race are the white characters. The name of the yacht, the NWA music, the OJ joke, and then on the beach, why don't you get in the water? Duh, because of her hair. So race is spoken to. You could have totally gotten rid of those characters because if you're not going to really do something with that aspect of the story, just make it about class. Don't insert the questions about race. And that's where I feel a little ambivalent.
I have a disappointing downbeat note in that I thought whiteness was a caricature. And that's a critique I have across the board. I think Get Out was able to present a type of white liberal ally image and figure that we hadn't seen in film that was biting, kind of like a biting commentary and something fresh. I thought the white characters in here skewed toward caricature. And that's the same critique I have of Spike Lee and the Black Klansman. Bubba, Jim Bob, Klansmen who have a low IQ is an easy way to let virulent racism off the hook. Because it's only these, knuckle-dragging, incest baby type, grown full adult, almost idiot type of racists that hold the center for what is the most deplorable representations of white supremacy. I think that's a mistake, and I think we've gone much more further in our understanding, and particularly when people of color and black people particularly get behind the camera, I think we have a responsibility not to paint white characters in such a cardboard manner. I think we duplicate the same criticism that we've had against how the white film industry has presented black characters. Are we going towards camp and satire? Is that the aesthetic tone? And it just became, for me, an excuse to have the NWA song.
And to have a yacht named Ya Bitch or whatever the hell it was called.
Yeah. And so these become narrative devices. In other words, you need an excuse for the chase. So you tell the person, well, I've tied you up, but I'm going to let you go now. I like what you're saying about the mask in terms of the doppelganger's version of the mask was this white mask. But then, here we go. I saw the scene later when the doppelganger backs up into the flame. And I thought to myself, well, that mask is the only way you can shoot a live scene of a person actually being consumed by fire. Anytime you shoot a scene like that and you don't want to go CGI, you're actually going to have, that's the mask you wear, the flame retardant version. So if you value the shot over the story,
Oh, you are in the woodshed tonight. You got the scalpel out. You got the tool, the screwdriver. You taking the machine apart.
Yeah, brother, that's what I do, man. We go up under undercarriage, brother. You know what I'm saying?
You know, like they do at the car show, and you take the glove and they wipe the white glove around the undercarriage to see if there's any dirt, and they take points off. Here's another thing to think about in terms of.
Come on.
Now, and I hate the use of this phrase, and I think it's right up there with intersectionality and woke, two things that should be stricken from common usage. What is this film saying about Black respectability politics? In the sense that if you have these grotesque depictions of Blackness, these underdwellers, but they can so easily go back and forth between their world and our world, what does that say about Black respectability and these Black Cosbys? Pyromaniacs can control each other. The mother can switch places, and then she can become feral, basically, and grunt and groan and fight. I don't know.
Right. And this is what I think is the film. In some ways, I think this is the social commentary that I don't know if Jordan Peele has been saddled with this and he feels that he has to do what he did before. Because here's me being very strident in my analysis. Is Jordan Peele an example of the cliche that everyone has one good story in them? Like everybody has a hit movie in them. And then after that, you're done. And that's what separates the artist from, the layperson who has a good story to tell. And I'm not sure, because if Jordan Peele felt he had a responsibility to give this broader social commentary, and that the work can't just simply scare you, it must provoke you to think about society and the world and your place in it in a deeper, more prolonged fashion. And to me, the hardest thing to do is just to make a good movie. Everything else will follow. Make a good story, and it will be thought-provoking.
And you probably saw some of this online. You got all these Hotep types fighting about how the movie depicts Black men, and you got other folks fighting, the Queen Mother Goddesses, fighting about how the movie uplifts Black women. Have you thought about this? Because I just watched, and I was like, oh.
Really, this, once again, speaks to the thirst that Jordan Peele's film Us is trying to alleviate. That is, I see this film as a product of the Trump era in which we operated, that we are dealing with a type of social political trauma. This generation, we haven't really felt in this manner. One could probably go back to 9/11. We can go back to the Vietnam War. Certainly, we could go back to World War II. And these moments where a society, a country feels a type of overarching tension, secular society feels a type of dread. And I think this film taps into that. That's why we have the Hands Across America, broad, general social statement that really signals a type of anomie, a type of normlessness, a disintegration into chaos, and that which has been repressed will return to the surface. And so all our doppelgangers, are these the immigrants who have been scattered to the margins, who are invisible? Are they going to return in a more politically charged manner? They're going to hold their hands against America. The film is speaking to, I think, these really broad anxieties. And certainly we project these broad anxieties as well to fill in some of the gaps. Us, to me, is like a Rorschach test that is built specifically to draw on our anxiety, fear, and dread. And in that sense, the film is brilliant because it does.
I want to thank Adelie Fanama one more time for that great teaching and sharing. And of course, I want to thank Brother Professor Kendall.